pointed out that it was the Turing centenary year, which it most certainly is. Alan Turing was born on the 23rd of June 1912. Many things have been done and are being done this year to commemorate Turing's life and his contributions. There's a Turing film, that's the website, quite an original website, and that's a picture of the actor jogging. Turing was a man who, I can relate to this, he got a bit stressed at times, and he dealt with his stress partly by running, so much so that one year he turned in one of the top 5 marathon times in England. He's said in that film by one of the academics to have been the greatest scientist of all time. That's one person's opinion. I can certainly make a case. I can name many big names. I think we all can. But certainly a case can be made that Turing's the best of all. Whether or not that's my opinion, I will sidestep. But throughout the talk, I'll give some hint as to why that case can be made. The talk title that I've given there on, I think, Turing Test, Turing machines and recursive Turing test. Yeah, I've done some work with some colleagues on the Turing test and on Turing machines, and it was nice to get both of them in the title of one paper. Come to that towards the end. Among other things, as you might know, Turing did a variety of things. We'll get to them. So there's a plug of the Turing film. There's Turing, there's the actor, and if you want to donate money and whatever, I suppose you can do that too. So Turing's second paper in 1936 on computable numbers with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem, which I understand means decision problem, even though we take it as meaning halting problem. This was done around about the same time as other people, von Neumann, Church, all coming up with the basis of what computability would be. Shortly after that, Turing got involved in leading a team of code breakers. Now, the work changed history. There were supply boats coming across the Atlantic from the US, and they were being picked off by enemy submarines, and the planes weren't able to protect the supply boats at that time. Turing led the code-breaking effort from his work on mathematical logic. Understandably, he didn't publish a lot during that time. So, and indeed afterwards, he was certainly discouraged from talking about it. So we have the notion of computability from that 1930. I've lost control. Modern technology. So we have the notion of loath to do anything. This is the singularity. This is the machine taking over. So to move on, now I might be a bit unfair on Claude Shannon here. Shannon was born in 1916. And maybe my web searching wasn't very good. I had a feeling that he published his stuff on information theory in 1940, and yet my web searching took me to 1948. Anyway, whenever, sometime in the 40s, no later than 1948, Claude Shannon comes up with his mathematical theory of communication, which is the birth of information theory. He was working for a telephone company at the time, and they were interested, strangely enough, in getting as many calls down the line as possible. Seems like a reasonable thing to do, and they asked this brilliant young mathematician whether or not he could help quantify what was involved. Now, some really good advances in research retrospectively seem, quote, obvious, unquote. So I will tell you a little bit of Shannon's work, the bits that I follow, and certainly not all of his results. Here I have three coins. They're different, and I like to think they're fair. And what I'm going to do is toss them one at a time and get some results. So because of the lights and whatever, I won't toss them too high. That one was a head, in case you're interested. That one was another head, in case you're interested. And this also is not a two-headed coin. that one was, well, coincidentally, a head. Now, they are fair coins as far as I know, so the probability of getting the 3 heads is 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. That's 1/2 to the power of 3 or 1/8. Or alternatively, I could say HHH, 3 bits of information. So one of the things that Shannon pointed out, which is kind of obvious when you stop and think about it, is that there's a relationship between probability and information. Namely that if you take 3, the number of binary events, and go 2 to the negative power of 3, or equivalently 1/2 to the power of 3, 1/8. So you get this relationship between probability and bits of information or code lengths. So 2 to the minus code length gives probability, that's if the code length is in binary, and to reverse that, the negative logarithm of the probability is the code length. Shannon did many other things. Another part of this talk will be Turing's 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. Good, we're back, I think. And here he proposes an imitation game where he says that if, well, among other things, he says that if we had a human interrogator and a human and a machine at the other end, and they're interrogated via teletype, nowadays it could be a web chat room, then it'd be interesting to see how they'd go after 5 minutes, but he felt, if I recall him correctly, that in about 50 years' time, and he's often misquoted, but he said in about, let's highlight the word about, 50 years' time, that the machine would have a pretty fair chance of succeeding at this imitation game. Now, I don't think Turing meant it to be taken as a test as such, but it's often called the Turing Test. Certainly it belongs to Turing. I think to call it a test of intelligence, possibly pushing it a bit, but certainly an indication. And he certainly talks about the idea of machines being intelligent. His 3 most cited papers by far are this 1936 paper on the halting problem and indeed computability, the paper on the Turing Test, even though he didn't call it that and even though I've said that's not the best name for it, and this relates to James Bourne's talk, at least to me it relates to James Bourne's talk a bit, the 1952 paper on the chemical basis of morphogenesis, where he talks about how you could start up with some rather small thing, some fetus or whatever, and by a series of chemical reactions and catalysts and whatever, build things. And people have gone a lot further with this. They've looked at how if you have this process and that process, you can get a third process, you can get waves forming, and of course with the waves of chemical concentration forming, you can end up with, for example, stripes on zebras. So I actually haven't read all the way through that paper, but I couldn't help but think of it when James was talking. So this takes us up to 1952, and we'll mention a bit more of Turing's work, but this is over 5,000 citations, a very big deal in biology in certain areas nowadays. Not to mention the halting problem and modern computer, and not to mention his Turing's work on the Turing Test. So moving ahead, so someone dear to Marcus Hutter and me and many people who we've just lost. So moving ahead, we have, let's take the Turing machine and the notion of information theory and let's combine them. Now, one thing I forgot to say is that going back to Claude Shannon, if I can control the machine, control this well enough to do it, Claude Shannon did that work in the 1940s on information theory, but Turing also worked on information theory. He talked about, I think he was near Banbury, he talks about the ban and the natural ban, which to him was a logarithm base E. So Turing was certainly working on probability and information theory as well, even if I can't give you the exact dates. I know he died in 1954, so he was doing it before then. And around about this time, Turing just happened to write a chess algorithm. He didn't have a computer to run it on, so he'd, by hand, calculate his move doing a two-ply search. You know, my move and their response. So doing a two-ply search by hand, it's said that he took about a quarter of an hour to calculate the moves. We'll see a little bit more of that later on. So moving ahead now to 64, we have Ray Solomonoff making, I will cheekily say, a retrospectively obvious connection. Now I say that cheekily because I don't think I would have thought of it, and furthermore, despite the fact that how brilliantly this stuff works, a lot of people seem very slow to catch on to it. So let's take the notion of the universal Turing machine from Turing 1936 and information theory from Shannon and Turing and put them together. Now, the universal Turing machine is something we take for granted, but which Turing pointed out that you could take a program for sorting and a program for multiplying, and rather than have to write two separate pieces of hardware for them, you could actually make them special cases of one big programming device. So we've all seen C compilers and Fortran compilers and what have you. We take it for granted nowadays, but when Turing came up with that, that was by no means taken for granted. So Solomonoff combines the notion of the universal Turing machine with information theory. He comes up with algorithmic information theory, and not just that. He goes further and points out that give me some data and I can, in principle, give you a probability distribution on future events. Now that's pretty damn good. Now, unfortunately, we have the halting problem. So in practice, we can't necessarily do everything, but we can approximate these predictions better and better with more and more time.
I think that the trackpad is when you tap it, it counts as a click. So whenever you're just tapping the trackpad, you're clicking, which is moving the slides on.
Okay, I'll try to slide without tapping then, thank you. Andrei Nikolaevich Kolmogorov in '65 independently had a similar idea. He was a very big name at the time, and so the field's often referred to as Kolmogorov complexity. It's a little unfair on Solomonoff, but Solomonoff was earlier. In fairness to both of them, Solomonoff published a technical report in 1960 detailing these ideas, and Kolmogorov was certainly walking around the Russian countryside talking about his stuff. So their ideas went back far earlier, but everything that I can see indicates that Solomonoff was earlier, both in publication and with the original idea it published as a working paper technical report in 1960. Solomonoff also went further than Kolmogorov. Kolmogorov and later Greg Chaitin, who was a teenager in 1966, they didn't point out the statistical probabilistic stuff you could do with this. Solomonoff actually saw this as a way of predicting data, giving probability distributions over the future. So we move a little bit further to the 1960s, and then we have a forgotten local hero. There's Chris Wallace, who was a mentor of mine, and this, I believe, is a young David Bolton. I didn't meet David Bolton until 1993. He certainly didn't look like that then, but I hope that's a young David Bolton, and apologies to David Bolton and or whoever that is, if I'm mistaken. Now, one legacy that Chris Wallace left us, which I have to give a plug for, is his book. So Solomonoff certainly in 1964 talked about these universal Turing machines, how you could use them for prediction. Wallace and Bolton in this 1968 paper not only developed the minimum message length principle, they show how to do a two-part compression. They then apply it to a problem of clustering. They give a formula as to how you would cluster, and then they take some real-world seal skull data and actually do some clustering with it. Now they followed up that seminal 1968 paper with 69, 70, 72 papers in 73, 2 papers in 75, and then a lot more before others started to get into the area. And it's a real pity that still Wallace doesn't get anything like his fair share of the credit. I mean, historically, there's just no argument here. There's his book. And I also have to add that when you look at who cites who, Wallace is very good at citing, not just Solomonoff of course, but people who came later than him, who for whatever reason, I'll leave you to your own imaginations, don't seem to be nearly as good always at citing him. Yeah, I'll leave that to people to work that out. So, getting on towards intelligence now, I want to tell you how I got involved in wondering about what intelligence was. So my next step is to this Searle's Chinese Room. Now that's also had many citations, the John Searle paper, I think it's Minds, Brains and Programs, or certainly has a title similar to that, where Searle talks about, imagine a room with an operator who doesn't speak any Chinese, any Mandarin, but receives a whole lot of symbols, perhaps under the door, and then looks at these symbols, goes to their lookup table and sends out a response. And the conversation continues like that. And then Searle made comments like, is this weak AI or strong AI? Is it weak AI that stimulating understanding of the language, or is it strong AI that we actually do understand the language? And I remember thinking, something that doesn't sit right with me about this, you're going to need a pretty big lookup table to take every possible thing under the door, read it, look up this lookup table, send it back, and then continue the conversation at length. So to me, one of the things that was missing was some notion of a compressed representation. If you ask me to speak something, say something in French or Spanish or whatever, even if I don't know what a verb is or what a noun is or what an adjective is, I will have the notion of those concepts. So that got me thinking, but I hadn't met Chris Wallace or thought too much about it. So we'll move forward again to something of interest to some of us. I don't know how well you can see that, but in 1995, I'd begun working with Chris Wallace, and the most public data of interest to anyone that I was aware of was the Australian Football League. So rather than just say, oh, we've got this many games right and this many games wrong, like all the pub footy prediction or footy tipping competitions do, we thought, well, how about we actually have probabilities? And negative logs of probabilities can be the scoring system, bits of information. And actually controlled the machine correctly that time. Now, you might not be able to see that unless you squint or put your nose on the board or whatever. But basically, here we are with, sadly this is bad round, not just because Geelong lost, but because this filthy scum team Collingwood won. But ignoring the obscenities on the screen, your score here is 1 plus the logarithm base 2 of the probability. So if you have no idea, you put in 0.5 and you get 1 plus logarithm base 2 of 0.5. That'd be 1 plus minus 1, that'd be 0. So lo and behold, you put in your probability and you get scored. So here on the scale for the round, this person got that many bits of information for the round and that total cumulative number of bits for the season. So been running that since 1995. With scores in bits of information. Okay, so going along now, having talked about the information theory, the bits of information, here's my attempt to contribute to the Searle's Chinese Room discussion. So Alan Hayek, who's a philosopher at ANU, sadly a Collingwood supporter, but otherwise currently out of jail, I believe. I remember discussing the idea at times about the relevance of compression, two-part compression in minimum message length to state the model and then state the data given the model, to the learning part of intelligence. And a lot of people didn't want to listen to me. And this is often a big compliment. It doesn't feel like it, but it's often a big compliment. Even when you get 3 awful reviewers' reports that you know you're probably doing a good thing, or a very bad thing. Anyway, so here we say, look, there's a relevance to the inductive learning part of intelligence. There's a relevance of information theory. So, you know, published that in that time. Meanwhile, independently, there's a Spanish guy who I didn't know existed at that time, Jose Adversarial. He published a paper with someone. He later told me that he was shy. It was his first paper, so I'm not sure at that stage whether they were boyfriend, girlfriend, fiancés or spouses, but he put her name on the paper because he felt self-conscious about his crazy ideas. And they not only relate compression to intelligence, but they went further than what I did. I just said, look, you know, Turing test needs extension with information theory. They actually came up with a nice little test. We'll see a bit more of that. Matt Marnie in 1999, a little bit later again, he said text compression is a measure of intelligence. And around about that time, Chris Wallace carrying me, that's why I'm hidden, partly because Chris carried me on that paper. He was a very smart guy, and I hung on to him as best I could. We formally related the algorithmic information theory of Solomonoff and Kolmogorov and somewhat out Greg Chaitin to minimum message length. So we related the information theory of minimum message length to algorithmic information theory in a pretty formal way. Okay, so that takes us up to about 2000. Now I'll briefly talk about a little bit of fluff. So I'm still interested in what intelligence is, and around about 2003 I get a third-year project student with me working as one of her 4 subjects for the semester to write a program that can pass IQ tests. And it actually did quite well. It even passed one IQ test. Just simple things like, you know, what's the next number in this sequence? 3, 6, 10, 15, question mark. And there are many IQ tests that have pretty straightforward pattern matching problems in them. Find a word of 3 letters which completes S and 3 letters to make a 4-letter word, and has another 4-lettered word which ends with T. So S followed by this 3-letter word makes a 4-letter word, and T at the end of this 3-letter word makes a 4-letter word. So we published that, and around about that time I met Jose Adversarial by email, and so here's more stuff from that paper, just examples of IQ tests. So with a program of less than 1,000 lines, we were able to, don't know whether you can see the results down here, but we even managed on one IQ test to get a score of 108, which was, you know, say the obvious, higher than most of the Collingwood Football Club. So, now what does that prove? Well, that some IQ tests aren't too hard to pass with less than 1,000 lines of Perl code. So there's the interface to it, in case you want to try it. Unfortunately, not all the software is there at the moment, but certainly some of it is. The dictionary is highly restricted, but that's it. Right, now I'll jump ahead. Markus Hutter, when he talks, will undoubtedly talk about things that happened a little bit after 2003 when Shane Legg and he came along. I remember Jose saying to me when Shane Legg and Markus Hutter came along, Jose said, we didn't have anyone to talk to, and then those guys entered. So Markus will say a little bit about that, or probably a lot. I'll say at least a little. Now let's jump ahead to Turing, the centenary that's being celebrated this year. This is from the conference in Manchester, and this is his chess-playing algorithm, his original 2-ply chess-playing algorithm. Nowadays, with the use of modern computers, we can play it on far higher look-ahead. But Kasparov wanted to play it on the original look-ahead of 2-ply, which is not very far ahead. It's said that the night before this big game, that Kasparov played it in his hotel room when the program was looking ahead 5-ply, and that the program lasted 27 moves once and 30 moves the other time. In this game, Kasparov has the black pieces, and the Turing program is looking ahead 2-ply. It's not too hard to find it on the internet. But here Kasparov, on his 16th move, has just checkmated the Turing program. So, not, as Kasparov goes on to say, not a bad effort for something written in the 1940s. Some more Turing centenary stuff and some Chris Wallace stuff too on the next slide. I remember talking to Chris once. So this is a special issue of the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society A. This journal goes back to 1643, the year after Isaac Newton was born. And they had a Turing Legacy special issue. I was a little lucky in that I was working on a paper with someone who used to be a PhD student of one of the editors of the special issue. That might or might not have been an advantage. The particular paper we have here, and it relates to several of the concepts we've discussed earlier. Imagine a universal Turing machine, if you know what one is and can imagine it. Some program written in noughts and ones which can be made to simulate, emulate any other program. So here's the question. If I feed that noughts and ones at random, will it remain universal forever, or will it eventually lose its universality? And I remember Chris Wallace raising this concept with me. So the notion of what we now call universality probability is due to Chris Wallace. And I remember he saying to me, Chris was a little frustrated sometimes at the very slow snail's pace at which the minimum message length work caught on. So he made the comment to me once that you might have noticed that some people, and I might be guilty of this sin, some people as they get to a certain age, some people do this at the age of 30, other people might not do it until the age of 120, but they don't want to take on new ideas. So if you tell them, look, the Earth is curved, they say, no, I don't want to hear it. I'm really comfortable in my paradigm. So Chris Wallace had this notion that universal Turing machines, as far as he could tell, will eventually lose their universality, and that explains why people lose the ability to learn. Now, Chris Wallace, like Albert Einstein, as far as I know, had a pretty good strike rate with his intuition, but it would appear on this occasion that he was wrong. So with my able first author and me hanging on, we go into great detail and say why universal Turing machines have a non-zero probability of retaining their universality. Now, I've since come up independently with a much easier proof, but this is all part of the Turing legacy and so many different articles in that issue. Back to the morphogenesis, and indeed the brain plasticity to me. Alan Turing was born in June 1912. His mother did this drawing in 1923. I guess he would have been 10, going on 11. Everyone else is playing hockey, and what's Alan doing? Hockey or watching the daisies grow? So what we think Alan was doing back then, it's hard to know, was he, as a budding engineer, he was looking at the engineering on the ground and trying to work out how it was working. I actually find that, I don't know why, I just find that very emotionally moving. I sort of probably need a psychotherapist to tell me why, but you know, this guy was just so far ahead of his time. Unless, of course, we read too much into it. Maybe he just didn't like getting hit by hockey sticks or something. And later on we have the 1952 paper. Okay, so Legge and Hutter do their stuff, about which, and others, about which Marcus will talk more. And meanwhile, Jose at Anthropocentric, he drops me an email and says, "Have you seen Legge and Hutter's stuff? You know, they're going on and doing this stuff too." So we got some funding from the Spanish around about that time, and believe me, I don't think the Spanish are going to be funding much for a while, from everything I understand. One of the people involved in the project came up with this wonderful icon here. That there's the adult human female, there's a baby, there's a non-human monkey, there's a cetacean, something that goes swimming in the oceans, there's a robot, and Ray, I hope you recognise that as a robot. And so the idea is we're going to take the mathematical description from Legge and Hutter, and we're going to try to come up with an intelligence test that will stop in a finite amount of time, that won't have two infinite sums in it, but it's going to stop in a finite amount of time, and you're going to be able to give it to anything. That's the theory, that you can give it to any of those. And you can interrupt it at any stage. So that was the idea of the project. So here's a little question for you. I hope this works. What's the next character? What's the next one? Okay, and it's G because we have two interwoven sequences. We have A, Z, Y, X, dot, 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 and we have A, C, E, G. Okay, so Jose's got this K, which is a measure of complexity for generating these strings. What's the next one? And why? Because I remember saying to Jose, look, I can see the answer because you've told me, but I don't know why. Could you please tell me why the answer is what it is? And so M is correct, G is correct. Does anyone want to tell me? So I asked Jose, why is blah the answer? And he said, I don't remember. So, should I tell you or not? Well, this is the rumoured answer. I can't help you with why. Right, so here are some more of our icons. And here we propose we're going to do this universal intelligence test. We're going to be able to measure it, so it's going to be able to stop in a finite amount of time. You're going to be able to interrupt it at any stage, and you know, so there's Collingwood supporter, there's a robot. You're going to be able to give it to any of those, and here are different properties of all these different tests. Can we have a test for all of them where we don't necessarily know much about the examinee being examined, derived from computational principles, not going to be biased, there won't be any humans intervening, good as a score, be meaningful, practical, you can interrupt at any time. Can you do it? I've got an alien in there as well because people like aliens. Journalists, if you've ever had the quote privilege, unquote, of dealing with them, like to talk about aliens. Okay, so that's the idea. Supposedly we can do all these things. Now the good thing about the work is that we did get some funding, and we got some progress. So here's your Turing test. There's the human. There's the Ray Jarvis robot. I don't know whether that's one of Ray's or what. And there's the interrogator trying to work it out. But it's a test of humanity to some degree. Hey robot, are you good enough to convince us you're a human? So look, let's not be too hard on Turing. You know, you read his paper in context. It's hard to criticise it. But the test is certainly anthropomorphic. We humans, rah rah rah. You know, are the machines good enough to be like us? There's D again. I still don't know why. And as I showed you from my work with Priti Gasangi, who was then a third-year student, some relatively simple agents can do okay on these questions because you basically just tell them the sorts of patterns to look for. Okay, this is the Levin-Hutter formula. It should be because we copied it down, and they've got a whole lot of environments. So you're going to have, so their idea, easy in hindsight, but lovely idea. What's intelligence? Well, you know, playing chess and playing Jeopardy, that's great, but you should be able to do lots and lots of things, like how about everything, and let's see how you go in all environments. So we'll add up how you go in all environments, and we'll give you infinitely much time in each environment, and that'll give us a total. So Jose said, look, you know, two infinite sums, and also, you know, they don't care whether I do this at twice the speed or half the speed. Let's reply to it. So click on this and it might move. So yes, so what do we do? Yeah, we replied and made up a test. So what's our test do? Well, it makes sure that the program terminates by having the KT Levin complexity, which means if the program hasn't got back to you after a certain amount of time, then bang, just grab an answer. And so we come up with some, there it is, there's a pseudocode. So we loop around a whole lot of environments and we adapt to it, okay? So we're going to adapt. So if I throw you a ball a long way from you really quickly and you can't catch it in time, then I'll throw it a bit closer to you and a bit less fast. So I will adapt the test to you. So Jose's and my idea, I should highlight Jose, I'm sort of very lucky to be involved with him on this, is to give a whole lot of tests, but try and tune the test to the level at which the person or the agent can do it. So if they're doing it easily, give them a harder one. If they're struggling, give them an easier one if you haven't already given it to them. And then if you get interrupted, then just stop at that amount of time and see what their score is divided by the amount of stuff they've looked at. Okay, so that's the anytime test, so-called. And then another issue that we came up with, testing all these agents. Great idea, testing all these agents. You know, we'll get the agent to do this, we'll get the agent to do that, we'll get the agent to do this, we'll get the agent to do that. But a lot of intelligence is about acting in social environments. So again, the idea of Jose, he came up with a distribution which we call the Darwin-Wallace distribution. That's not Chris Wallace, that's Alfred Russel Wallace, who is the forgotten person behind the theory of evolution. So basically, it doesn't make a lot of sense to put us in environments, say on the surface of Jupiter, where we'll kind of get crushed to death, and we'll kind of freeze to death, and we kind of won't have a lot to breathe either, and we'll starve. So we'll try and put agents in environments where you're likely to find them. And indeed, you look around this room, and what do you see? You see a whole lot of similar agents all congregated together. And part of what we have to do to get by in this world is to be able to navigate social environments. And by and large, you will see like interacting with like. And yes, we interact with dogs. Dogs interact with dogs as well. So the idea behind this Darwin-Wallace distribution is that we want to be able to take into account games and interactions. So come up to a nice formula saying that you have this startup environment to do with the probability of the environment, and then all these agents being in it, and then we evolve this environment. Some of the agents might die and the environment can change. When the Earth has changed, the environment can change. So we evolve this stuff. Then we thought, look, we might as well apply all this stuff to compare human intelligence to artificial intelligence. We're going to compare them. And you know, someone had to do this. How well we did it, I'll let you decide. But we took a lot of Spanish humans and decided, all right, we'll set them loose. So some of these slides you'll have seen before, just as well, because I'm skipping through them at some speed. The answer's still D for whatever reason. I hope Marcus agrees, that's still the Leeuwen-Hutert formula. Okay, we've got these environments, and what we're going to do now is see whether or not the human agents and the machine agents can watch things moving around this environment. Now, we're not going to show them the connections. We will know what the connections are, but as far as they're concerned, they're just called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they won't know what's connected to what. So there will be various patterns of what's connected to what, and the machine agent and the human agent will have to go through these environments of different levels of complexity. 3-cell environment, pretty easy to learn, 4-cell environment, 9-cell environment, and every now and then the pattern can just stop with those nominated probabilities and start up again. And you've got to follow the good things, avoid the evil things, try to get rewarded, try not to get penalised. What ended up happening? Well, by and large, the Spanish humans who were computer science graduates from Jose's department, if I recall correctly, and the Q Learning program, which has been around since about 1992, it's just a learning program. By and large, they got pretty similar scores. which wasn't what we were expecting. We thought the humans would do decidedly better. And then we looked at how the scores compared to the level of complexity, and we found that by and large, on the more complex environments, people and agents didn't tend to score quite as well. No great surprise. Okay, so the Turing test with Turing machines now, which is the title of the talk basically. The Turing test with Turing machines, we're going to say, all right, our anthropomorphic Turing test. We're going to have a look at a human and a machine and try and work out whether or not the machine is the human or vice versa. Well, that's nice, but you know, maybe dogs would like to be involved in this. Maybe the dog would like to say, hey, I want to know whether that's a dog or not a dog. So can we do this Turing test with humans or dogs or indeed Turing machines? How might it go? So here's the story. So our Turing test, we're going to generalise it. So we're going to have a judge, we're going to have the reference subject, the evaluation, and some interrogator protocol. So there's an interaction interrogator protocol, there's a reference subject we compare with, there's the thing being evaluated. So the reference subject being evaluated in the traditional Turing test is your human, the subject being evaluated is your machine, and the judge is another human in the original Turing test. So let's try and do this another way. So we might take some distribution of humans, we might take this as the reference, we might sample this human at random, we might let this person be the judge, and we might have this as the computer trying to pass itself off. And they all have goals here. They all have goals. This one has the goal of being recognised as a human. This one has the goal of, well, it's been programmed to have the goal of being recognised as a human. And this one, the judge, has the goal of getting it right. This could be another setup. We could have this distribution of objects, this judge, and this thing being evaluated. So that would be a different variation on the theme. Okay, so let's have an adversarial test. The Turing test is adversarial. This one wants to be the human, this one wants to be recognised as the human. Okay, so let's come up with a different adversarial game that they might play. So a so-called matching pennies problem, where basically when the guess is made, so we both try and guess something, 0 or 1, head or tails. If our guesses match, then the predictor gets a point and the evader loses a point. If the predictions are different, then the evader gets a point and the predictor gets a point. So we could play this game. And indeed, Bill Hibbard, one of the co-authors, he proposed this as an intelligence test. So can we do this? So what we might do is start off with a Turing test, which has a base distribution for the reference machine. So the reference machines might be machines, they might be humans, they might be whatever, but we start off with a base case and we're going to iterate through and extend this Turing test. And what we'll do is we'll start giving scores. So the ones that are doing well, they'll get a good score. The ones that aren't doing so well will get a bad score. So in this adversarial test, if 2 of you are competing, and one of you gets a really high score as the predictor, and one of you gets a very low score as the evader, then the predictor's high score is noted for the next round, and it's more likely to stay on, and the evader's low score is noted for the next round, and it's more likely to be pushed out. So we can take the Turing test and iterate it to different levels. So the idea is have some base distribution at time 0, here's your judge and here's your interaction, and take some group of agents in some large set of dogs or humans or indeed Turing machines. So take a whole lot of Turing machines as your base agent, and now do a large lot of these tests. Okay, so from the first time around, from the base distribution with all these agents and the judge and the interaction protocol, see how they all go compared to one another. Then B's so-called intelligence, agent B's so-called intelligence at the time step is averaged from this sample of imitation tests. And then, having done that, go back and calculate a new distribution in which each of the machines has a probability of appearing, which is directly related to the intelligence score it got at its last level, and go back and repeat that. Well, will this diverge or will it converge? That's an issue that I can't give you a great answer to at the moment, and it's also intractable. It might take a while, but this is the notion of the recursive Turing test for Turing machines. To start off with the base distribution, so it might be the Turing test as we know it, and one of the Turing machines might be a human. Remember, we're trying to see who's better here. We want them to play a game where they're competing, and a positive score for one is a negative score for another. So what do? We play them off against one another in this game, and depending upon how their scores are, they have probabilities of advancing or not advancing to the next level. And then we take the next level agents distributions, D1, D2, D3, and we repeat this. Of course, depending on the agents in the game, they might all appear in different orders. Okay, the final slides there are basically a slight variation on the same talk. So it's probably an okay time for me. According to me, it's 5 minutes to midday. I can keep talking, but it's probably a good time for me to stop and let anyone seek clarification, ask questions or whatever. So thank you for your attention.
Distinguish between intelligence and, let's say, memory access?
Do you want to repeat the question so everybody can
Yeah, can we distinguish between intelligence and memory access? So yes, in a variety of ways. So going way back to the 1990s, when I was originally saying that inductive learning is part of intelligence, I would have said inductive learning is part of it, memory is part of it, and indeed what you need to be able to do is to make your inductive inferences of the world around you, that E equals mc squared, and that if you push the door it will open, and if you dehydrated and you drink water you will feel better. You need to be able to do that stuff, and you need to be able to remember it. And certainly in all these tests, if you can't store your models of what's going on, then as the models become more and more elaborate, so one particular model being that k equals 9, 12 and 14, or even finding your way around this labyrinth, as these models become more and more complicated, if you can't store it somewhere, then you're not going to do as well. Now James Newton-Thomas pointed out, I'd be interested to see the details of it, that if a human's got internet access or something, their IQ goes up by, I think he said 5 or 10 points. And one thing that's certainly going to help you get a higher IQ is to have a pen and paper to take notes. So yes, absolutely, memory, and anything you can do to augment your memory is going to help. And speed's going to help too. If you've got all these environments blurring past, the sooner you can get the points, the sooner you can move on and get more points.
With the two-ply Turing chess program, do you know what heuristic you used for evaluation? Because I mean, probably it was simple, but if you choose a sufficiently sophisticated heuristics, you can play better and better even with two-ply.
Absolutely. I hoped to get to that conference. Unfortunately, I didn't. There were all the Turing Awards winners present, and 9 Turing Award winners present, and Kasparov too. What I do understand from someone who was there was that so firstly the the programming company, I think it's the same people who write the Ribka program, they've incorporated it. I don't know whether or not they will disclose it, but they've incorporated it. The other obvious thing to say is that TuringArchive.org might have it. What I do understand about the program is that it likes material, it likes mobility, but it also likes to keep pieces close to the king. So if you step through this program, when White played the first move, the Turing program on 2-ply played the first move, it didn't play the pawn to king 4 to e4, it played it e3. And I believe that's because it likes to keep pieces close to the king. And later on in the game, we saw it retreat its knight back to there, presumably to keep pieces closer to the king. And Marcus, that's all I know, but I would be curious to know this. And one thing I do suspect is if we put the Turing program on a high enough look ahead, given what we have available with modern technology, it might well have been a different outcome for Kasparov.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the recursive Turing test. If it would be possible to have the rankings be intransitive, that is like A beats B, B beats C, but C beats A. And if that's the case, then would you be able to meaningfully say like which agent was more intelligent or something like that?
It's an excellent question. The issue of transitivity of results, A beating B, B beating C, and C beating A. Indeed, when you're playing these games like matching pennies, one way to do relatively well at them is to be very unpredictable. So if I know that I can say, look ahead 4-ply in trying to model you, but you can look ahead 9-ply in modelling me, it's not going to be very useful for me to try to model you because you're just going to keep beating me at it. But if you keep beating me, it might be that, yeah, certainly it can be intransitive. Certainly it can be intransitive that A beats B, B beats C, and C beats A. And we see that in certain chess games, amongst certain chess players. We see that amongst certain tennis players. But one strategy that's particularly good here is to be as random as you can. Because if you're as random as you can be, then it's very hard for them to model you. So if you have a very long period pseudo-random number generator which is driving your strategy, it'll take someone who's got enough memory and enough inferential ability to actually work out what you're doing. So absolutely yes, we can have A beating B, B beating C, and C beating A. And it's a little disappointing that for this particular game that you can do quite well playing at random. Like, you know, you expect to get about 0 on average. Of course, for other games, playing at random won't be good enough. Thank you.